Okay, this isn't a build guide per se, but you can probably figure out what to do with all this information. Face breakers. Let me make this a little bit higher quality. Face breakers. They have this whole thing about unarmed attacks, specifically unarmed mace attacks, and the unarmed mace attacks use this thing's physical damage, so we don't care about that because we're not using mace attacks. We are using Hollow Palm. If you don't want to get any spoilers, don't look at the tabs at the top. But we are using Hollow Palm. So we can ignore this, can attack with a one-handed mace, we can ignore the damage and the boss's face broken, but we should still be able to use, with using Hollow Palm, we'll use a quarterstaff skill. We can get more unarmed damage per strength and armor per strength. The reason we are particularly going for a quarterstaff instead of something to do with maces is because this strength works really well with Iron Grasp. Iron Will, 1% increased spell damage per 2 strength. Boom, we take that with the Crown of Eyes. And Iron Grip, 1% increased projectile attack damage per 2 strength. And then Hollow Palm gives us a bunch of attack speed and crit chance, but only for quarterstaffs, which basically sticks us with Staggering Palm. Since we're using Staggering Palm, we only really care about the projectiles that are caused by the buff of Staggering Palm. So in reality, you can just use Staggering Palm to get a stun and then use a different ability. But if I do this build, I will just be sticking with Staggering Palm because it's fun, particularly with Retreat. Retreat gives you 20%, this is 25, so Retreat 3 will actually be 30% more projectile damage if you've damaged an enemy with a melee hit in the last 2 seconds. And supported skills deal no melee damage. I have to hope that this doesn't change, because if this changes in the patch notes, we're fucked. Well, this build is fucked. But it supports skills which create projectiles, and Staggering Palm doesn't create projectiles. It gives you a buff which creates projectiles. So Retreat gives the projectiles 30% more projectile damage if you damage an enemy with a melee hit in the last 2 seconds, but the supported skills technically still does melee damage because it doesn't support Staggering Palm, it supports the projectiles from the buff from Staggering Palm. So this is just, it's nice, it's more damage, you can constantly be getting the more damage as long as you keep stunning stuff. So we mostly care about the projectiles, which is good because Iron Grip only scales the projectiles. Now there's some obvious things to think about. You're using Iron Grasp unless they add a new way to get Iron Grip and Iron Will, so you don't have a body armor. I mean, you've got a little bit of a body armor, but like with Hollow Palm, you really want evasion and energy shield. That is partially fixed by way of the Stone Fist, which will give you, it'll give your gloves at max level, so it'll take a while to get there, but at level 100, it will give your gloves a base evasion rating of 300 and a base energy shield of 100. Even at level 90, that'll still be 270, 90, which depending on what the prefixes and suffixes are. I mean, if you're sticking with your face breakers, it's nothing. You'll just be getting a ton of armor from this, but potentially with Olroth's Legacy, I believe face breakers are Ezamites. Don't quote me on that. So you might be able to yoink the armor and unarmed damage and slap them into either your new rare gloves or into runic meridians. Of course, if face breakers aren't Ezamite, which I mean they seem like they are because I want them to be, you can at least slap one of those modifiers into gloves, but those things might be super expensive. Plus, depending on how Way of the Stone Fist works with uniques, it might even just pivot those away from strength scaling, in which case you'd really want to remove the modifiers and slap them into your new gloves, because you're scaling strength. So if the Way of the Stone Fist doesn't affect the socketed stuff, it just affects the actual modifiers, the explicit modifiers. There's not much else to talk about here. It's strength stacking. I opened the strength tab on PoE2 DB so that I could be like, oh, strength. Look at how much stuff can give you strength. There's something else I was thinking of that I thought could be kind of fun, potentially, which is Wolfsbane, I believe, is Ezamite as well. And Svalin is Kalgurin. Permanently intimidate enemies on block. chance to block damage is lucky. I don't know exactly how you would get block with both of your hand slots being empty, but if you could do that, Darkness Enthroned, Shield, you could potentially grab the chance to block damage is lucky from Svalin, and if Wolfsbane is a Calgar or a Azamite unique, which I believe it is, then you could potentially grab that with Olros Legacy and slot those into a belt. I imagine belts are pretty important for getting stats for stat stackers, but it's something to think about if you can get a way to block while unarmed. Also, that's it. I mean, it's a strength build, so or rather, not a strength. It is a strength build, but it's a stacker build, and stacker builds tend to be like late game builds. But that especially would be late game. You would need to get at least 2 Olroth Legacies, at least 1 Svalin. I imagine Wolfsbane's probably pretty cheap, but at least 1 Svalin, a Wolfsbane, and 2 Olroth Legacies, depending on how it works. You might also need to get lucky with that. And then you would need to get a... Oops, I don't know why I thought that was still open. You would need to get a belt, Darkness Enthroned. And then you would have to get a way to get pretty good block. But that was just a thought I had. And again, there is a possibility that, however Way of the Stone Fist works with face breakers, it might change it so that it's just I don't know. I'm just thinking of random stuff, because it is, it's a monk guaranteed thing, so it might change it to be just unarmed damage per dex and evasion rating per dex. This is probably going to be local, by the way, would be my guess, but it might be global. I would think it's local, though. Which, if Fist of the Stone does work like that, then you just don't do that at all. You don't go strength stacking at all. You don't get Iron Grip and Iron Will, but from a chest piece, but you would get a ton of extra attack speed and crit chance from Hollow Palm because you could use an Evasion Energy Shield chest piece, and you would be able to grab Falcon Technique for even more increased attack speed because this gives more attack speed. You could get more and increased attack speed. Plus, I don't know where it is on the tree, but I believe it's called Way of the Bear. Hide of the Bear, maybe? Nope. There is a... that's not how you spell dexterity. There is a node in the game on the tree. It's the Great Boar that gives you life per dexterity, so you'd be able to go full dex stacking, gain a bunch of that as well. Plus, you'd have even more evasion rating to go for stuff like deflection. There's a lot of stuff you could potentially do with that, but it would mostly be that you get a ton of attack speed from both Falcon Technique and Hollow Palm, plus the crit chance because you'd be going dex stacking, but with Evasion Energy Shield gear, at least until you get to full crit. Once, Giga Endgame, you might be able to swap some of those items purely to Evasion, less Energy Shield, and then you get to have more attack speed, less crit, but you'd already have your crit cap, so it wouldn't be necessary. That's just some thoughts that I felt like putting out there. We still need to see how Fist of the Stone works, particularly with uniques. I finally got around to watching the Q&A. I didn't watch it on reveal, but they said that it does work with uniques, but maybe I'm just dumb, but it felt like they were being a little vague about whether it works, how exactly it works. Does it just give the implicit? They said it doesn't affect skills, which makes it seem like it does affect, unique explicits. So I'd imagine it would change some of these. but who knows? Also, for what it's worth, I've done a couple like staggering palm tests at the low end, like early game, because obviously we don't have martial artists and we don't have Facebreaker, so it's really hard to tell how good it will be. But since you'll have Facebreaker, it'll still be worth it to scale the boss's face broken to gain a bunch of damage on your Facebreakers, a bunch of flat damage. I think they show it here. Yeah. Here you can see it goes from, you know, it goes up to,
physical damage.
At the very least, 188 to 252. So the boss damage on Staggering Palm didn't feel amazing. Granted, I didn't have any like armor break or anything. It was a very basic test, but they even show this one off in the video, showing off this. I don't remember where it is in the video. Oh, right here.
How about Fist of the Gods?
Bonk. So, you know, you'd be able to do that as well, because one-handed maces. So at level 20, that's 1500% base damage. Like, it can do quite a bit. This, of course, wouldn't get the attack speed or crit chance from Hollow Palm. I couldn't really tell you if it would actually be worth it, but you would mostly be using it after stunning, so the attack speed wouldn't really matter that much. The crits would be nice. It'd be nice to get this thing to have like big crits, but you know, if you're using Staggering Palm, you'll also be getting a bunch of stuns, so if you want to, you can throw this down against whatever while like just playing the game normally. But I think the 1500% base damage on the gloves more than makes up for it. You'll still get the increased attack speed from Falcon Technique. Plus, with a bunch of supports, who knows? It'd mostly just be used. I didn't make it to the end game, so I don't know if any of the other like quarterstaff stuff works better. Like Gathering Storm on a perfect release has 1000% damage effectiveness. So that would use that wouldn't use Facebreaker damage. That would use Hollow Palm damage, and it's less. You know, the Hammer of the Gods is 50% more, but this would get a ton of crit chance and attack speed. I don't know how attack speed really works with these perfect timing things. Something else to consider. Obviously, there's just Flicker Strike if you've got a bunch of power charges still. You could use one of the ways to generate power charges that I talked about in a previous video. If you're using Staggering Palm, you won't be using a ton of power charges. You'll be using the one per set of illusions spawned. But if you can generate a ton of them, you could hold a Killing Palm and like as just like another gem you have just to generate charges. You could potentially just throw down Flicker Strikes if you want. And maybe Hollow Form will just feel good enough as long as you're generating the images with power charges and, you know, plus the Facebreaker increased damage. It might just feel good enough that you don't need a separate bossing skill. I don't know. Also, I was talking with someone while I was doing like a practice run. Someone in chat mentioned this is just how strong Runic Meridians are. I mentioned it a little bit earlier with like the Facebreakers, if these are Ezamites, and you can just unsocket like unarmed damage, or the armor per strength. The unarmed damage would be more useful for any like random unarmed damage build, but the armor per strength would be generally better, in my opinion, for a non-unarmed build. I mean, it would definitely be better than unarmed damage, but this could potentially give you a Kalguran helmet unique, or Ezamite, like that could be so many unique mods. So I think Runic Meridians is going to be really strong late game. I hadn't even considered that. I was just thinking about it for like, you know, this is a 5 extra slots that you can throw in like Dex or Strength runes into, or a bunch of the new like Kalguran runes. But I didn't even think about unique modifiers. That could be, Runic Meridians might be really, really strong. Also, with Staggering Palm, Way of the Mountain, I'll be getting enough stuns that Way of the Mountain I think would feel fine. I wouldn't want to rely on it necessarily for defense, but the attacks you use yourself and attacks granted by this Ascendancy class deal 20% more damage, so that could be nice as well. And then, of course, we have to wait and see what these two nodes are. It's going to be a little, what's the phrase? A little bit of egg on my face. I almost said a word far more crass. I'm not going to apologize, though. A little bit of egg on my face if they release the Monk or Martial Artist Showcase tonight. I imagine it'll come out in about 3 to 4 hours from when I'm recording this right now. So, anyway, that's a plan for a potential endgame build. Strength, and depending on what Fist of Stone turns Facebreakers into, if anything, potentially something else stacking unarmed. I don't have the tab open anymore, but Staggering Palm. We'll see. Like I said, not a build guide. Just throwing ideas out there. If someone else can come up with ways to turn these ideas into good ideas, do it. Please let me know. I'd love to see it. I'll be turning it into a vague idea by slapping shit together once the league launches.